Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be looking into a place you've probably heard a lot of wild things about. Aokigahara, widely known as Japan's suicide forest. You know, for years, the internet has just fed us all these ghost stories, exaggerated myths, and frankly, some pretty sensationalized headlines. But today, we're cutting through all that noise. We're going to dig into the actual ecology, the deep mythology, and most importantly, the profound human reality that gets totally lost in those spooky internet videos. Right off the bat, if you walk into Aokigahara today, you're going to see a sign with a message that reads, "Your life is a precious gift from your parents." Just let that sink in for a second. It immediately sets this deeply respectful, incredibly contemplative tone. We're not talking about some cheap geographical anomaly or a haunted house setting here. We're talking about a real place that is deeply, deeply intertwined with actual human vulnerability. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the sea of trees itself. Then we'll dive into the folklore and the yūrei. After that, we'll cover the media and the macabre, followed by the tragic reality, and finally, we'll wrap up with compassion and prevention. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the Sea of Trees, a unique ecological reality. So Aokigahara translates to Akuba Tree Meadow, but it's most famously known as the Sea of Trees. And get this, it's a massive 30 square kilometer woodland sitting right on the northwestern flank of Mount Fuji. What's absolutely fascinating is that this forest thrives directly on a floor of hardened volcanic rock. That lava is incredibly porous, meaning it literally acts like a giant sponge for sound. It absorbs echoes, creating this eerie, twilight-like ambiance, and a heavy silence that visitors always talk about. But listen, just because it's quiet doesn't mean it's empty. Actually, there is a huge, stark contrast between the sensationalized myth and the ecological reality here. The myth tells us that Aokigahara is this desolate, unnervingly dead zone where compasses just wildly spin out of control. Which, fun fact, that compassing, it only happens if you literally place your compass directly onto the magnetic lava rock, not if you're just holding it while walking. The reality is so different. It is a thriving, lush, temperate ecosystem. We're talking year-round frozen ice caves, beautiful native flora, and super diverse wildlife. To put this into perspective, we have to go all the way back to the year 864 CE. That year marks the last major eruption of Mount Fuji, which essentially carpeted this entire area in a massive flow of lava. Over the centuries, nature slowly reclaimed that rugged, uneven rock, eventually building the incredibly dense canopy we see today. It is quite literally a geological marvel that was born out of sheer volcanic destruction. And speaking of nature reclaiming the land, this place is teeming with life. From being a dead zone, the forest is home to Asiatic black bears, sika deer, red foxes, greater horseshoe bats, great spotted woodpeckers, and even Japanese macaques. It's a deeply vibrant, flourishing ecosystem. This alone totally shatters that darker modern reputation, proving that life absolutely thrives, even in an environment famous for its heavy silence. Moving on to Section 2, Folklore and the yūrei, the spirits of the forest. Back in 1903, Lafcadio Hearn wrote something really striking. He said, "The hand of the dead was heavy. It is heavy on the living even today." This brilliantly frames how interconnected the living and the spirits are in traditional Japanese culture. You see, in ancient Shinto and Buddhist traditions, the spirits of the dead don't just vanish. They exist right alongside us in the unseen world. If they're respected, they become protective deities. But if things go wrong, well, something else entirely is born. And that brings us to the yūrei. The term roughly translates to faint spirit or dim soul. In Japanese folklore, these are restless spirits of the dead who literally linger in the mortal realm. Why? Usually because of violent deaths, unresolved intense emotions, or a lack of proper funeral rites. They are bound to our world by things like sorrow or revenge. This belief directly links human psychology with the supernatural, explaining exactly why secluded, heavy places like Aokigahara take on such a spooky aura in the collective imagination. You've probably actually seen these spirits depicted in pop culture without even realizing it. In traditional storytelling, yūrei have very distinct defining characteristics. They wear white funeral robes, they have unkempt black hair, they have no visible feet, and they are obsessively driven by unfinished business. They're also usually tied to specific locations of trauma. Think about classic horror movies like The Ring or The Grudge. Those visual cues come straight from centuries-old yūrei folklore. Now, adding to all of this dark mystique is the deeply unsettling folklore practice known as ubasute. This is an alleged Edo period practice where elderly or infirm family members were abandoned in remote locations, places exactly like Aokigahara, during times of severe famine or hardship. Now, historians still debate how widely this was actually practiced, but the myth itself spread like wildfire. It firmly planted the idea that the forest is haunted by the angry spirits of those abandoned. That ancient narrative really laid the psychological groundwork for the forest's tragic modern reputation.
All right, on to Section 3, Media and the Macabre, and how it shaped a dark reputation.
So, tracing this timeline, we obviously start with the geology back in 864 and then move to the Yubasuto folklore in the 19th century. But a massive turning point happened in 1961. That's when Seicho Matsumoto published a novel called Tower of Waves, which essentially romanticized the forest as a place to end one's life. That single piece of media catapulted the site into modern infamy. Fast forward to 2017, and we saw massive global backlash over Logan Paul's YouTube exploration that exploited the site for shock value. It's a clear pattern. Media portrayal has consistently shaped and dangerously encouraged the forest's darkest realities. And this introduces a real, highly dangerous psychological phenomenon called the Werther effect, or suicide contagion. It happens when sensationalized media coverage of a suicide inadvertently encourages vulnerable people to imitate that behavior. When movies, books, or completely insensitive internet videos glamorize this tragedy or lean into the dark aesthetic of Aokigahara, they aren't just telling a spooky story. They are actively endangering people who are deeply hurting and seeking a way out of their pain. Let's dive into Section 4, the tragic reality, moving beyond the headlines. 105. That is the heartbreaking number of bodies recovered in the forest during the year 2003 alone. It was such an alarming record that local officials actually decided to stop publicizing the statistics entirely to deter further incidents. By refusing to release exact numbers year after year, the authorities are actively trying to starve out the Werther effect. They totally recognize that this isn't some macabre scorecard for a haunted forest. These numbers represent real people, real families, and profound, devastating suffering. When you compare the fictional narrative to the human reality, it's pretty jarring. Fiction focuses on the spooky urban legends, the haunted compasses, the cheap shock value. But the reality highlights profound, devastating crises of social isolation, intense work-related stress, and severe clinical depression. We have to look at phenomena like hikikomori or acute social withdrawal. The forest is honestly just a mirror reflecting a much broader public health crisis. It's not a backdrop for a ghost hunt. Finally, we have Section 5, Compassion and Prevention, focusing on the modern response. So, what's being done? Well, authorities have made a massive, proactive shift away from silent tragedy and toward active rescue and community care. First, they're posting signs with compassionate warnings. Second, they're conducting regular, coordinated patrols with police and volunteers who literally sweep the woods looking for individuals in distress. And third, they're providing emergency phones connected directly to crisis hotlines. It's a huge effort to literally catch people in their darkest possible moments and safely guide them back to the light. But the response goes way beyond physical patrols. Japan is actively trying to broaden the conversation on a national level. They're working hard to reduce the stigma around mental illness and shift toward highly responsible media reporting guidelines. It's all about fostering environments for open, honest conversations and providing solid community-based counseling. The entire goal here is to ensure people never feel driven to the isolation of Aokigahara in the first place. Seeking help needs to be a totally normal, judgment-free part of everyday life. One of the most poignant things you'll find in the forest is a sign reading, "Please think carefully and consult with someone. There are people who love you." It's such a beautifully compassionate message. It reminds us of the incredibly vulnerable people behind the data. It cuts right through the terrifying isolation and literally offers a hand in the dark. It totally challenges the old folklore of vengeful spirits by introducing a profoundly human, deeply caring community intervention. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really tough question to ponder. How do we balance the preservation of incredible natural beauty with the profound, heavy weight of human tragedy? Aokigahara is literally a breathtaking marvel of nature, deeply rooted in history and myth, yet undeniably scarred by sorrow. As we consume media and explore the world, we really have to ask ourselves how we can respect the immense pain of both the past and present while still appreciating the environment. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I truly hope this gave you a clearer, far more compassionate perspective on the Sea of Trees.